Welcome back to Uproot. My name is Bekele-Piper, and I am so glad you're back with us, talking with Shiro, Koinange. I'll keep practicing. By the time the show is over, I'll have it right. We're talking about her beautiful debut novel, The Havoc of Choice. And if you were with us in part one, we explored the many women characters, the choices both Shiro made as an author, as well as the characters made. So we're going to start part two with a question with one of our book club members. So I'm going to toss it back to Mona, who's got a question for our author.
Sure. Hi, Shiro, who I can't see right now. Sorry. I come from a culture where respecting your elders is a very important and a big deal. And so when I was reading the book, and especially the tension with Wanjiru and her parents, especially her father, and how she didn't disagree and how she hid so much from him, I would love to know, I mean, I'm twice the age as her, but I feel like I really resonated with her. And I would just love to know, you know, how you decided what to include or not to include, and that tension between being respectful and learning and growing as an individual person. So, thanks.
Yeah. Even me, I struggle with Wanja.
Yeah.
I have a daughter who's strong-headed like her. So tell us about her.
I think my favorite thing about Wanja is that she's completely underestimated. And that line that I think one of my favorite lines in the book is, that Wanja believed that Amani was her superpower because the day she was born, she became invisible.
Yes.
And there's a beautiful thing what happens when women get underestimated and they know that no one's looking at what they're doing. So you have the chance to kind of surprise them. But also that piece for me was really special because there's a time in your life as a woman in this culture when you kind of had no relevance for the men in your life, ideally, because you're too old to be like sitting on their laps and like getting cuddled, and you're too young to have had a child. So they don't quite know what to do with you. I'm just like, if I like, I don't know. Let me just like ignore her until she has a husband, right? And then she becomes relevant again, right?
Yeah.
And with Wanja, I really wanted her in her silent, underestimated way to push back against that without having to be like, no, listen, I have an opinion, I have a voice, because I know as I'm the last one in my family, but I'm also in a part of a really big family. And while I might have wisdom that I think is wise and might be wisdom for everybody, I know when to keep my mouth shut. I know when to tell my brother, yo, just go tell our uncle this, that, and the other, or when to just buy someone a book and put it on the coffee table and walk away. And it's something I'm still learning as somebody who I think has also been underestimated, but I enjoy being underestimated because then one sees you coming.
Yeah,
right?
I like that. Okay, so but tell us about Wanja. Was she a person of conviction? Did she really believe in what ODM was doing, or was it a moment for her just to prove a point?
I think Wanja believes in science, and she believes in the things that have worked before will work again, right? And I think that she and that was the lens with which she was watching her father do his thing. Like, this thing is cute. It's great that you want to like focus on like the issues, but like these guys don't care. These guys care about like who gives you money. And she may not believe it, but I think she believes it. But I think she believes more in like history and science and all of those things. And to be fair, also, when I was doing my research, I realized that, honestly, ODM were organized. They're the most organized opposition we've ever had. In fact, that's why we have such a healthy political culture, because we've always had a really strong opposition. And they were definitely the more organized of anyone running in that election. And Wanja, being the scientist she is, would see that and be like, okay, if you want to change things, it might be great to be like, we'll change from inside, but she just kind of saw the thing for, if you want to win an election, this is how to do it. I don't know if I really struggle when I think about like what you believe when you're so young, because they change so often, and I'm quite young, not like I used to be, but I am not the same woman I was 2 years ago, and I will not be the same woman 2 years from now, and I'm okay with that. So even when people ask that your question, did she have any kind of ideals, I'm like, she likely did, but they're probably very fleeting, as they should when you're that age, because you kind of need to try everything on for size.
You know, when we mention these characters, you know, we can't help but put on them everything we see in society. You know, so one of the things I wanted to explore with you is also, were you trying to make a statement about feminism with both Kavita juxtaposed next to Wanja, juxtaposed next to Chepto, and, you know, the other women in this book? What were you trying to say about maybe men and women both in Kenya, but also maybe in the Pan-African context? Because certainly there's some ties that can be made there across our borders.
I wasn't actively trying to say anything, but again,
You make some choice.
You make some choices. I will struggle with the question around feminism of this book because I really just portrayed these women in the way that I thought gave them respect and saw them and gave them the whole breadth of like decisions and choices to make. The women that are in this book reflect the women that are in my life. Women who do things, women who make choices that they don't have to be the right ones, but the ones that they kind of thought through the most, right? Like the scene where Anne and Kavata are really going through the whole thing for what country, where? No, it's cold in London. I say they don't like Africans there. You can't go. All of those things. Like even if she made the decision that wasn't right for everybody in the room, it was one that was based on some kind of like formula, right?
It's interesting you said. I don't mean to cut you off, but when you said at the beginning that you're struggling to call this feminism, it makes me wonder how do you define feminism? Why is that hard?
It's my definition also is really so my easiest way is that the feminism that I believe in is not one where we fix things without men. Okay. I don't want to live in a life without men. Women run things in the world that I live in, but not because the men, it's not because, I don't even know why they do it, but I don't want a world where men are not holding up their half of the world. And the reason why I struggle with feminism is because the loudest part of feminism says that is the world that works. And my next book will address this, because I'm just like, let's see what happens when women run everything all the time and what that society looks like. We might all want to believe that it's going to be perfect. But the reason why there's two races on the planet, nothing about this was like by mistake, right? So the whole thing for pro-women being anti-men is why it begins to be like, I don't want to live in a...
But then does that say that women are all the same? That's why? Because to me, there's a spectrum of feminism. There's a spectrum of femininity as well. And an African femininity as well.
Yeah, I agree with you. I'm struggling with this question because I don't think I have a spot on answer because I'm trying to find language around feminism that fits for me. So I haven't rushed to any box yet, and I'm just like, let's talk about another
very light topic, Pan-Africanism. In this book, I was just noticing when we took the break, our group is quite broad-reaching. Our friend Alicia grew up in West Africa, and remind me, Alicia, in Cote d'Ivoire? Burkina Faso. Our friend Janet also did. She's Kenyan. We have a Sudanese, Eritrean, Ethiopian. Mona, you have Korean roots. So we have this kind of diverse setting of women here. And I wonder how much of your book, intentionally or unintentionally, you feel like is accessible if you're not Kenyan, if you're not of this generation who witnessed or experienced these events.
That was a real concern for me as I wrote it. I wrote this book for Kenyans first. It was for Kenyans first, and I'm like, if the world wants to read it, great. They will get to understand a piece of our world. But it was always intended for Kenyans first. And in fact, the initial book deal I got was from a UK publisher who had a Mexican editor on their staff. And so the first round, actually not even before that, my agent is an Indian woman. Actually, she's from Singapore, but she lives in India.
This is very complicated.
Exactly. All of this, my team. So the book was read outside before it was read here. Actually, Washuka was the first kind of Kenyan, the person that I trusted the first to read the book here, from the industry. And it was read by a Mexican, then an Indian and a Mexican, then the UK publishers as well. And it still kind of held some emotional truth, right? And even when they were reading it, I was still editing the work here because I wrote the first draft of this book when I was living in Cape Town. So the initial dialogue was really sounded like Cape Town. It didn't sound like Nairobi at all. People were talking about more breakup and you're saying, and all of these things that Kenyans just don't say. And because I wrote this book in a span of where I was living for 3.5 years in Cape Town, and when I had an editor read it here, he pointed this out very, very early on the first draft. And it's the reason why I guess the things that took the longest to write and to fix were the texture, the language, sitting in cafes and being like, oh, Kenyans don't see that. Kenyans say this, let's put that in.
For sure.
So I really wanted to be emotionally true here first. It has run true elsewhere. I don't know if, I don't ever intend to translate the Kiswahili, the Kamba, the Kikuyu in the book. I'm like, move on if you don't get it. If you don't get it, you don't get it. Because I don't see French being translated in.
Thank you for that.
Yeah,
cheers to that. Cheers to that. Absolutely.
In fact, the thing we'll do in the 3rd edition, because we just ordered the 2nd edition.
Ooh, congratulations!
Yes. I'm now sold out best-selling author.
That's awesome.
And I think I want to, going forward, everything I write, I will stop italicizing our language, because then you're othering our language. Let's italicize the English, because that's not ours.
Come on, go ahead.
Full of italics.
To my Ethiopian heart, that makes me glad. That's fantastic. Actually, this might be a great time to introduce Washuka, because we haven't talked about some of the other really incredible work that you do in restoring Nairobi's library landscape, and Washuka is your publisher. So maybe we can pass the mic to Washuka. Washuka, you asked a question earlier, but we didn't really pause at that moment to really make the connection between the two of you. So I want to take a step back from Havoc of Choice for just a moment to talk about this larger landscape of literature in the continent and the value of books and the value of libraries. Tell us a little bit about Book Bunk. I've put you on the spot, but I know you've made this speech before. Tell us about
Bank Books.
Yeah, sure, Bank Books and Book Bunk.
Sure. Yes. So Bank Books is I'd say our second baby together, because our first baby is Book Bank. Haha, clever.
So tell us which one are you going to tell us about first? Book Bank? Or
I'm going to tell you about Book Bank, because that's how we kind of started the work. So Book Bank is something that Wanjiru and I put together, formalized in October 2017, which is an entity basically that does this work related to restoring what we're calling some of Nairobi's most iconic public libraries. So we've been looking at 3 so far. The Macmillan Memorial Library on Banda Street, right in the heart of the city, is probably the most well-known one. And then we discovered through that journey that it actually had all these satellite branches, and started to work on those. Initially, there were a group of 5, then now a group of 3. So our very first restoration project has been the Kaloleni Library, which is super special to us. We finished that work in June last year. And then we're just wrapping up now on the Eastlands Library, which is located in Makadara, and then moving on to the Mothership, which is the oldest one, opened in the 1930s. So when she's not writing and being fabulous at that, she is directing a significant part of the work around public libraries and resourcing them and reimagining what they could be like, and really just trying to breathe life into them.
Yeah. Thank you. It's an incredible gift, not just to Nairobi, but I think to our whole continent, just to remind us the value of these spaces and of books and of shared experiences around reading. So then tell us about Bunk Books.
So Bank Books, which as you can see is not such a big play on words. It was a little bit obvious. We were kind of tired of thinking, to be honest, but we're like, oh, that makes so much sense. Just flip it. And then we'll call it Bank Books. But Shiro and I initially met, for those that don't know, through the same kind of circuit. Her and I have always existed in the kind of creative sector of Nairobi, doing very many different things, but kind of rooted in writing and the ecology of writing and publishing and how that work is circulated, really. So initially we met because we were working on a literary festival called the Kwani Lit Fest, that she was the most wonderful producer of.
So kind.
Yes.
It's a lot of love flowing through this here.
I remember first working with Shiro, and you know that moment that you have of like, oh my God, I've met my better half person in this world, and I'm never going to let her go. And when she went to South Africa, I understood that what she was doing was important, but I was bitter, you know, because I was like, God damn it, I'm going to have to put on a whole literary festival without this woman. What am I going to do? So that's how we met. And through that process, we were quite keen to look at, I think, other venues, public venues specifically, that could be the home of these literary festivals that we were putting on, which is how we came across the Macmillan. But long story short, because of coming from that world and obviously her being a writer, it was very important to us, I think, that we start to form, I suppose what we'll call a little publishing imprint at the moment, because we only have 2 things that we've produced so far, but things that we're super proud of. But wanted to start something that reflected what we wanted to see happening in the scene. Absolutely. So that's kind of what Bank Books came out of. And I was massively, massively proud for our little home to be where this thunderous works sits.
Oh, that's beautiful.
And so this is our first baby, our first publication. Very, very proud because we are just going into the second print run, which is marvelous. So she has sold 3,000 copies so far, which is fantastic. since July last year. And then our second baby is a children's book by Lupita Nyong'o called Sulwe. And we produced that in Kiswahili, in English, and in Doluo.
Fantastic. Congratulations. We need you. You know, Toni Morrison said if there's a book that you want to read and it's not written, write it yourself. And you've literally said if there's not a publishing house that's writing the books that we want, we're going to create it ourselves. And, you know, hongera sana and asante, because really you brought us what we needed. So thank you. We can't wait to see what else will come from Bunk Books.
Thank you. Yeah, she makes it easy, to be honest.
Make it easy, Mama.
Gosh, may all of our partnerships be this beautiful. I love it. My goodness. Yeah, Lisa.
Billy, what happened to the men? I thought men
yes.
are part two.
We are going to come back to the men.
I don't want to live in a world without men.
Well, you know, I think you're not alone in that. So where do we start with the men? So let me just ask you just a small question. Is Ngugi, is he named for anyone in particular? Any other writers we've heard about in Kenya? Or is he just, did that name just fall out of the sky?
You know, actually, to be honestly, and it's going to be on the internet forever, but I just thought about what is the most recognizable Kenyan name. And Ngugi, it's like, okay, that's easy.
Goes in. Fine.
Yeah, they won't struggle to pronounce that one at least.
Yes,
yeah. There's no imagination there, I promise.
So I actually want to start with Amani, because you said you knew where his story was going to go, and though he's not yet a man, he represented something. I mean, a lot was put on him too. When he's born, his grandfather arrives in the world as a grandfather. It's almost as if, you know, Wanja didn't exist because of the way they took it in his birth. He is the one in pursuit of his mother who, you know, I just want to get to my mom, makes that choice to jump out of a car that leads ultimately to his death. And at the same time, he is this bright light in the book in the middle of a lot of heartache prior to his death. You know, in remembering him, they talk about what his laughter did for their household and how he would bring them back around. And what should we have learned from Amani?
Yeah. There's a wisdom to children that I think we all forget to see because the children within us are covered in so much drama and like all of the scripts that we've been handed. Amani for me was a difficult decision because I knew that someone had to die. I only managed to meet kind of halfway through that it was going to be him because it had to be the most innocent person. And the death that would be the most or the least understandable. But also, in a very logistical way, the book had to move forward. And at the point when he dies, the book is kind of all over politically, kind of running around the country, following everybody. And I needed something to bring us back home. And nothing, as we all know, brings us back home like a funeral does and a death does, because it doesn't matter what's happened. When somebody dies, you just like, shoo, go back home and you remember what it's like to be family. That's why his life had to end the way that it did. That scene came back to me more than 20 times. Go back. And I'm not a mother. I'm not a mother. I have 7 nieces and nephews that I love to bits. And Barbara's last born son is about Amani's age. And I was thinking about him being like, nope, I can't do this. I can't do this. I remember actually so many times trying to pick up the phone and call Barbara and be like, what would it be like to lose your son? And I can't even say those words. I remember trying to watch films where mothers had lost. I really tried to connect with that pain. And I still don't know if I did do it any service. But his death for me was important to bring the story back, but also because that idea of Kenya being this beacon of peace died. 7, right? We are all about like, oh, look at Somalia, oh, so bad. Look at South Sudan, horrible. and then it happens to us, and we're kind of still there, being like, oh my God. And I don't know if you've understood like what that pain meant. And of course, like the idea of peace dying was what on a larger level that means, but also just the idea that the story had to move on and we had to come back to family and all of these things. 07 changed my idea of this country for me. I think I got a lot more jaded and I work because the library work is for me a sense of just trying to create some sense and create spaces that are neutral and people to come and talk about their feelings and talk about, even if it's like do nothing. This country doesn't allow people to idle and just sit still and do nothing. But I definitely, that work is born out of a hopelessness I feel about the change that we need coming from the top. I don't know if it actually should come from the top because the problem with the top is that oftentimes people don't ask questions about what you want. Right? Do you even want a democracy? I'm like, would you rather just have a king? Like we don't ask questions, right? We assume we know what our people want, but no one really sits down to ask questions. And I think everything about the kind of the rose petals fell from my eyes in 07 and in the same way that like Amani died, it's like the peace, the idea of you guys having your shit together is actually the biggest lie. I think we're just really good at PR. We invest in like take it till you make it.
Yeah.
But like, we don't have anything together. We're probably a lot more hurt and broken than countries around us that are dealt with a lot more conflict.
Well, I mean, as an Ethiopian now, you want a question? Sure. Yeah, absolutely. Sorry,
when I stopped reading the book, the one thing in my mind was a question about healing. So you kind of went through what the family did through the epilogue, like, Kavata did this, Ngugi did that. And we kind of get a sense of how they struggle to heal. But then what stayed in my mind is how are the communities, like stepping out of the world of fiction and just going into how it is now. Because even as an outsider, I sense tension between ethnic groups, between tribes, and I don't understand it. What is your perspective of how people are healing from like more than a decade ago?
And before you answer that, Shiro, I'm going to actually add another layer on that. Shiro also has done some beautiful writing outside of her book and essays, and I read an essay you wrote about your trip to Kigali, Rwanda. And I just want to read a quote from that essay, because you said that Kigali showed you what it's like for a nation to mourn together. And I wanted to ask you, in line with what Donika's asking, has Kenya mourned together? Have we healed together? Not just in post-election violence, but even in this pandemic, as we have all experienced it in different ways. Are we together,
Unfortunately, I don't think that we are. So when I was doing the research for the book, I tried to find centers for the people who had lost something, a family member, their homes, their livelihood, somewhere where they could go and just gather and just spend time with other people who'd experienced the same loss, and I couldn't find even one.
You mean you're trying to find a physical place,
or like an organization or a body that's specifically dealing with like the post-election, the post-election violence. And I just wanted to see like a museum, or even just a room in a hotel somewhere, where every Thursday at 5 p.m. they have a poster saying, if you are a victim of post-election violence, come for tea, come for conversation, come for therapy, come for healing, come to talk. I couldn't find one. I'm not saying I looked everywhere, and if there's one out there, please send it my way. But I wondered about that. I'm like, here we are. How many years has it been? Where are we? 2021.
13 years. 13 years. And on the eve of another election.
Exactly.
In 2 years,
And still, every time we have an election, I go into like,
yeah, of course. Yeah.
We all do. I'm just like, let me check if my passport is valid. Am I going to vote? Do I want to stay? Do I want to go to... And these questions are about the thing, again, it's supposed to be the biggest pillar of our citizenry as a country.
It's about our choice.
Right? Yeah. So one time you have a voice and it gives us anxiety. So no, we haven't healed together. And I struggle with this question because I don't know how we will. I don't know if it's now having roundtable about this book, because this book, I want to start the conversation. Kigali or Rwanda does it where they have a whole month to grieve, and like you can't talk about it's not encouraged for you to talk about the genocide at other times of the year, but on this month you're like, let's just spend some time remembering, right? And when I visited Kigali for the one and only time, it was just at the end. It was, I think the month is April, and I'd gone there on the 2nd of May, and they were just coming out of this they had this hangover, so everything was still quite somber. And I was just like, this place is so dead. Where's no one having like a good time? But then I was told what was happening. I'm just like, that is powerful.
Yeah, you said in your essay that during the month of April, I didn't know this either, that there's no music played in bars or restaurants in the month of April.
People
there are
just
no parties.
It's very somber. It's
a month, the entire month to absorb
sit in your pain and see what comes out of it.
Yeah.
And I'm not saying that's the way to do it, but I'm saying that there needs to be some way that people can just go back and think, so we don't go into like anxiety and you're beginning to vote because, oh my God, let me just go do it and run and vote my house. Like, it's supposed to be a moment of joy. And until we can resolve that, I think that elections will always be about the wrong things. There's no other way. I don't know what it looks like, because I'm not sure that the Rwanda way is again foolproof. I'm not sure the SA way, again, and when I lived there, I could not sit in a gathering where apartheid didn't come up. And this was at the 20-year mark. And I got quite tired of it, I must admit, but I'm just like, but I wasn't here. It's not about me, right? So for those people who lived it, they need to talk about it till they can't talk about it anymore. And that's the only way to heal.
It's interesting. I think I interviewed Njeri Mwangi last month about her and Boniface's film Softie. If you haven't seen it, it's worth your time. A really moving way through another family who's pursuing human rights for this country in the midst of political conflict. And I feel like in some ways, their film, your book, has given us places. You have given us that place that we can go to and sit and talk. So thank you for that. Whether you intended that book to be a place for us, it has become. I think this room is a place for us. I hope that all of us will go home. And I watched Softie with my kids, and I was telling Alicia, who teaches high school at my kids' school, this book needs to be in the schools because it gives kids an access point to a really important part of history that whether you're Kenyan or not, this is in all of us. This tendency to be like, this is mine, that's yours, is in all of us. We'll all retreat to that. When our back is against the wall, we will come into that mode of like, this is mine, that's yours. I said I was going to talk about the men in this section, and we talked more about the world.
No, I want to talk about the men.
So I want to talk about another man character that I was telling her at the beginning. I was like, when you do the film version of this, can I be Pato? And she was like, Pato? And I was like, yes, because he was this character. I felt in a lot of ways he was the, I'm going to mess up my sheng, the Wananchi. He was like the average guy, but he also brought this comedy with him. But also at that point when, I'm forgetting. Thuo had to make the decision to jump out of the truck. It was his push. And he was like, I'm going to help you make your choice. Go, And I just love that about him because I was like, gosh, isn't that all of us? At some point, you need someone to push us like into what's better for us. So, but tell me for him, I felt like I thought you even named him Pato because he's supposed to be the people. And like you were trying to just say like, this is what the people, like the average guy eventually learns in Kenya, average woman, that you have to be shrewd. You have to be like, you can do both dances. Like, walk the line, but also know how to walk around it. And I don't know, just tell us about his character. Was he just like an afterthought? I want him to be more.
So you have to think about everything when you write a book. Some people are just like, I need someone to like say something funny in this line. Something funny there. Before I answer, can I ask you a question? Sure. Oh, yeah. So would you be a Pato or a Thuo if you're sitting in a jail cell or actually at the back of the car? So would you be the one jumping on your own or needing to be pushed?
I'm definitely a Thuo, unfortunately.
Yeah, me too.
I'm firstborn, so I'm like, everyone has to be taken care of. Everything will be done in order. I want to be a Pato, but I'm not.
Yeah. I think there's always going to be those two people, right? The person who's just like, these are the laws, and if I've been arrested, I have to sit here until I've released, right? Yeah. And the guy who just knows you have been forgotten. Yeah. These guys have forgotten about you. They don't know, they didn't write your name in the book. Yeah. You don't exist. Go. What are you doing? Exactly. And I am definitely a Thuo, and I think that I haven't, like, it's a muscle Nairobi will make you flex into more. The Pato muscle is a very
I'm soft. That's exactly what it is, actually.
Really, you don't want to be a Pato. The reason he was so confident is he was a repeat offender. Yeah.
But maybe that speaks to my life of not having experienced enough. I don't have enough street smarts to survive.
But to be honest, be in jail again and again and again and again.
Yeah. To be honest, I just wanted some joy. I wanted some lightness. I wanted this, because also my supervisor told me I have no sense of humor. I could never be a comedy writer. And I was like, I'm going to show you some. I'm going to try and be funny. next time I'll do better. But I really needed, because it was a very tense moment, and when you're sitting with Thuo, you're kind of over his position, and he's not going to get himself out of there. You know this. Either his wife is coming to get him out, or he's getting bailed out by Ngugi, or someone else. Everybody else is in another part of the country, so I'm like, we need someone to come and get this man out of here. And that's what Pato was. Moving. We all need a Pato to be like, jump, guys. You want to wait for the thing? Call the guy and bribe him. Fine. You'll get your thing faster.
Just get it done. Yeah, no, we do need, and the country needs those people too, who's going to be like, let's find a way to get
Nairobi. It's Nairobiness, I think. That thing for get it done, even if it means bending the law. And I'm not saying break the rules. I'm just saying if they're going to bend them.
So
she's like, no, we're not breaking the rules.
Keep storing the line. Oh, Sasha, Oh, sorry, Sasha, and then Janet. Sorry.
Okay, so I have a question about Lawrence, and I think it's really interesting. You touched a little bit on this before, but I think it's really interesting that an artist, writer, oftentimes you create something and you don't realize how that particular line might be interpreted by other people. And so then it creates a whole other side of the story that maybe you didn't intend. So I'm thinking about Lawrence because for me, Lawrence, although he was he had a small role, he was such a meaningful person to me, because when I saw him sitting there in the cafeteria of the mall food court, in such an ordinary place with all of these people just doing everyday ordinary things, and he's experiencing this extraordinary grief and worry and anxiety and stress, and he's trying to get as much as he can out of that phone call. And it's like his heart is somewhere else, but he's there in that uniform, in that cafeteria or whatever it is. I just felt that, because for me, as somebody who is of the diaspora, I know that scene very well. The feeling, I know it very well. I know that tension So I'm just wondering, Lawrence, was it a situation where he was an intentional character that you wanted to bring in, maybe people of the diaspora? And I know you said you wrote this for Kenyans, and I love that. I love that there is no glossary. I love that. But I'm wondering, did you intend for him to bring in the diaspora, or was he, again, more of an afterthought character?
No, he was super intentional, and thank you for asking about him. He doesn't get any,
he doesn't get any questions
at all.
in the podcast.
So he's an important one. I know you'll be like, Lawrence. Oh yes, that guy.
That's kind of like the diaspora sometimes. By the way, like, all those of us.
Exactly. He lost everyone.
He lost everyone.
Yeah.
My goodness.
There's more Kenyans living in the US than I can imagine. And I wasn't in Kenya for the 2013 election because I was out writing this book, and I was so stressed. I was like, I want to go home. If Kenya is burning, I want to be there. There's a thing about when things are going to shit, you just want to be there with the people that you love, right? Yeah. And I imagine what it must have been like I have lots of family who live in the US, even till today, and what it must be like, because all you're seeing from the US news is, oh my God, look at the violence of everybody. And it was bad. But often it's painted a lot worse in the media, and that tension between like watching the news and calling the people being like, oh, we're fine, we're actually just drinking gin. Don't worry. And that tension is one that I felt doesn't get enough airtime. So I really wanted Lawrence to represent, again, all the Kenyans who live in the diaspora, but also this experience isn't unique to Kenyans only. Yeah. If you live away from home and things are going well or going really badly, you just want to be there.
Absolutely. If you've been uprooted.
Ooh.
Got it? I have to slip it in there. I have to slip that in there. But absolutely, yeah. No, thank you for bringing those. You're sorry. I can remember my parents, during the 85 famine in Ethiopia, like the desperation. Like if you could cut it with a knife every night, waiting to call to the Times lineup so you can get through, and then the static is terrible, you get cut off. I mean, just the heartache that presents.
To the point, I feel like the phone ringing brings trauma.
Exactly.
What is that phone call?
Exactly. And in fact, you have to immediately say what's happening. Hi, Mom, it's Lil. Everything's okay? Yes. You have to immediately in the first 10 seconons iron out all is well. Yeah. Because otherwise, it's
you can't waste your time on pleasantries.
Yeah, you can't.
And even just that moment when Kabata just goes like, I don't know why, but that guy feels Kenyan, right? And we've all felt that way when you're abroad. And you're like, tell me about that guy's energy. It makes me feel like he might be Kenyan.
Exactly.
And that cannot be stated enough, I don't think.
Yeah, no, it's so true. There's something really heartbreaking, but also beautiful to be in the diaspora, because those are the lifelines to home, Janet, you also had a question. I know we can talk about all these things.
Yes, so I wanted to, again, if I may just go back to Ruby to Tuo very quickly. Someone in my book club mentioned that, is he maybe representative of that sort of slice of society of people who are fully dependent on their employers for everything, for rescue from jail, for our monthly salary, for, financial assistance if someone is sick, if there's a birth and they suddenly, the bill gets out of hand, things, is that a fair assessment?
Yes, I think it's fair, but it's incomplete. I think he's the kind of person who believes in the systems that exist, that they will work in his favor, and that they're really there for everybody. So he's very much an idealist. And I think that could also be called naive, because like nothing about what he believes is naive. It's just that he believes in the police are here to serve us, they're here to serve us. If I've been arrested with and then people have found out where Kavata has gone, surely someone somewhere must remember me and come and get me out of the cell. So he's super idealist, but also there is a sliver of our population who will be like, this is my everything, and these people are my everything, and there's really nothing about. It's really difficult to tell them that there's more. You could those hours between 5 and 5 the next day that's when you can like do more and kind of diversify your everythingness to other things. Right.
Life coach.
Tuo also had a very difficult childhood.
He did.
He lost his mother in the 92 clashes.
Yeah, he did.
And then his father abandoned him.
Oh, that was heartbreaking.
And, did he learn maybe, it was a great backstory, but maybe did he learn in that experience that the more low profile you are, the less life punishes you.
Well, he talks about that too, right? At the beginning, he talks about when he's giving that backstory. You see how many notes I took. And yet I was like, I am not going to be able to ask all the questions, but there's a beautiful part where he talks about, it's just here, very early on, his father is talking to him about to walk away, and he says, since you think you're big enough to disobey me, you can go your own way. Right. So his father dropped the bag he was carrying that contained their remaining possessions. He paused a brief moment before he walked away from his son. Thuo stood rooted and silent. I mean, just that sense of like, he just learned. And then I think in the next page, he reflects on that and says, choice is basically not for it's not for the poor. It's not for the marginalized, and I think, whether or not, again, it was like meant to be a statement, that was something that really resonated with me. I think all of us in this room have to acknowledge our privilege, right? We have the privilege of being able to dissect our choices and make different choices and pivot. But for so many, there is no choice. There's just, this is what life hands you, and then what you do with it is then maybe your only choice, truly. You can't drive your own destiny. But there was another question on this side. Did I miss somebody? Shuka, did you have one?
When I said we're going to break all the laws, and she was like, no, we won't. You missed that part. You don't do that here.
I'm talking too much. One of the things I'm realizing is that I'm really enjoying being like an audience member and having nothing to do with putting any of this together. No, it was about Thuo, and I think to Janet's point, like there's so many people I think that we've spoken with or sessions I've listened in on where people talk about how docile he is, and it causes so much reflection for me because to your point just now. Then you do start to think about, and I think that portrayal is super powerful because a lot of readers get frustrated with him, like, oh, do something, move, jump off, like, why are you just sitting here, without realizing that that's not necessarily a train of thought or a possibility of action that's always available to every person. Absolutely. So for me, I find him to be such an interesting character in that way, in that moment, because it says a lot about what choices are available to you.
Absolutely.
Depending on where you're sitting.
Yeah, I mean, as a mother of black sons, I would tell them, wait in that jail cell. Don't you dare jump off. Don't you dare make any choice that's going to risk your life. There is this balance that you're always having to think about, and that's not a privilege everyone is afforded,
I find that a strange comparison, though, because I don't know that I would tell my black son that in this black society.
Oh, you haven't told your black son in this black society to stay away from the police.
First, my child just can talk, particularly to the police. Wow.
But that's a privilege, Lisa.
Go to America,
that's a privilege, though. That's a privilege. I've told my children here, zip. Just, in fact, when the police comes to our car, I'm like, especially if I'm just the only one driving, they'll feel protective of me. I'm just like, don't say anything. Sit there quietly like a good African son. Actually, maybe a good African son would actually be like, step in. I don't know. What is an African son these days? I
just wanted to say that I just was thinking of an interesting connection about the fact that our discomfort with Thuo and his what we thought was docile, for me, is very much like the discomfort we felt about the woman who decides to leave her family, right? It's like, we're uncomfortable with him for not being able to make that choice, right, which she obviously doesn't have the privilege. But in her case, she did have the privilege to make that choice. She could get on a flight and she could, whereas I feel like in a lot of stories, we're very much used to seeing the African woman as like devoted to her family no matter what, even if it tears her into 50 million pieces. But seeing her make that decision to say, I'm leaving because I said I'm going to leave, I feel like it's that same place of discomfort.
Yeah, absolutely.
Why is he not moving, but why is she making this decision?
Absolutely.
I don't know if I might add to that, but I remember distinctly because I was here in Kenya during the 2007 and 2008 violence, and I remember even the discussion my husband and I had about whether or not we would leave, and our distinct feeling was that we felt, for good or for ill, that we had committed ourselves to Kenya. And it felt a bit like an abandonment to just leave. And we didn't also know if we might be able to provide aid or shelter for some of our staff or extended families. So we stayed. But I also remember thinking clearly that frustration at the Kenyans and thinking, gosh, you guys, if you just all stood up and made a stand, this would be different. And yet, of course, forgetting that it's never that easy. And people are not all of a thing. They are not a monolithic enterprise. And of course, now having gone through but having witnessed the things that have happened in the United States and the post-election violence that occurred there, of course, I am even more humbled by that. So I think it is a bit of a privilege to say that there are these that you can take a stand, or you can be other than Thuo when we don't always have those options, and it's so easy to judge from the outside. So that was just a good reminder to me thinking about my own experiences and having been here during that time and having witnessed things that have happened in the United States as well more recently. Just conservation.
To add to that, I wonder if Thuo is the complete opposite of the mobs that we saw, because those people did make a choice, right? Like he chose to trust the system and the system failed him.
Yeah, absolutely.
But all the people who did choose to act made the completely wrong choice, which resulted in a lot of death, and he was the
antithesis. Yeah,
So
absolutely.
I was comparing him to the men who decided, you know what, we're going to take matters into our own hands. We're going to loot the store because you're not from my ethnic group, so I'm deciding for you that you get out of here, and he was not. So I like the fact that he trusted the system, but unfortunately for him, it didn't live up to his expectations.
This happens often, that my perception is very different than everyone else, but it never occurred to me to perceive Thuo to be a weak character. I only ever perceived him to be such a good, loving, kind man. If I could find a man who could love me the way he loved you.
You were good, yes.
I'm telling you, I mean, he's just such a good man. And so, yes, granted, he did trust the system. The system wasn't good to him, per se. But I would say that among the characters in the book, and relative to so many other men who chose to take matters in their own hands, Thuo maintained his humanity, and he maintained his family. I think that in the end, he was a victor.
Thank you, Lisa, for that. Yeah.
The system wasn't worthy of him.
It wasn't.
I love that. I love that idea.
Thuo, I want mine.
Looks like you have your sequel, maybe. Maybe the next book is that love book, that romance you're going to write. Maybe it's I don't know.
Thuo love story. We'll see.
I'm very conscious of time, so I want to ask you two quick questions. Quick-ish. First, you say in your work around Book Bunk that a lot of this work about restoring libraries and these spaces is about the collective imagination of Kenya. So I want to ask you what you hope to contribute to that imagination. And then my second question, maybe to wrap up, is also what's next for you?
We need a lot more imagination, to be honest. I see it in my work. I see it in the way that we do everything. We just need to remember that we're allowed to dream again. I'm a product of public school education in this country. I went to public school all through, until I went away for grad school. All of my education was in this country. And something for every day, between 3 and 4, I would go to the library, and my job was to imagine. This is St. George's Primary School, and we'd sit there and just read whatever books, where we had an hour of the day when your job is to just be a child and lose yourself in imagination. And I noticed that shift happened when it became about, okay, now not so much imagination, now let's make some money for the country, let's build the economy, and everything we're all being made to do computer science and business admin, and art was taken away from the curriculum. And I think we forgot that we have the right to just paint our houses pink if we want to. Let's have buildings, as basic as that, but also just the way we solve problems and everything. I think that everything about our lives has to be decolonized. Why we choose to prioritize the first name, which is often, as we know, because the system is made to make up last name the English name, or what are we saying about our own names? I was talking to my sister this afternoon about how the Dagreti Corner as a phrase, for me, it really, as a name of a place, really bothers me, because we're kind of, I don't know if you know the history of the word Dagreti Corner. The Brits called it the Great Corner, but Kenyans couldn't say the Great Corner, so it was called Dagreti Corner. I'm not sure it was in jest or because we had a problem pronouncing it, but that we've taken that thing that was what we were made fun of and called this area that. I'm just like, do we call it something else? That's not
well, that makes me wonder about Macmillan Library.
Oh, yeah. Biggest question we get asked is if we want to rename it. And it's not the most urgent thing for me to do, because we haven't changed the space. You have to change the space before you can rename it, right? So once we've done everything we want to do, then we can think about calling it the Nairobi Public Library or something that doesn't necessarily bring back any kind of historical triggers. But I think we just need a lot more imagination, and we need to just remember that that's where our juice lives, right? That's where our secret sauce is. And everything I do, the writing, the library work, for me, all of those things are just like the same. I couldn't write if I didn't do library work, and vice versa. The reason I build libraries is because I cannot expect Kenyans to pay 1,700 shillings every time they want to read my book, because then I know I'm only dealing with the 1% of this country. And then what happens to everybody else?
Thank you for that. Yes.
And that's why libraries are for me, a distribution plan more than they are. I'm just like, oh, I want my book read. Boom, let's build some libraries. Boom.
I love it. You make the way by walking.
Exactly. I love that. Yeah. So everything that I do is about just like giving people space to imagine other things, to talk about things that are difficult, to sit in their pain, to sit in their discomfort, to idle and do nothing. If they just need to do nothing. Yes. And until that changes, that's what I want to spend my life doing. To your second question, I want to write about love and companionship and the way that the city has shaped our dating and how we find each other. Yes. Before the pandemic, I spent just under 2 months. Well, it would have been longer if COVID didn't happen, but I was in West Africa, and my job for this project was a research project that was funded by the Edinburgh Book Festival, and they paid me to go to these countries and Tinder, be on Bumble, swipe, and go on the dates.
You are kidding me. Okay. People walk back.
Yeah, and for just under 2 months, I'd go and I'd meet with people who I had only interacted with for the first time via the internet. And that was the only law. So I'd wake up, I'd do some book punk work, and then swipe, and then be like, oh, what's happening in Gambia today? And it was incredible to just see how the internet has changed how we're meeting people, how we're relationshiping, because so many people are just like, we didn't meet on Bumble, but we wouldn't be together if we didn't have WhatsApp calls to connect. They live in different parts of the car, or they live in different parts of Nigeria. And I think that everything about the way, especially in Nairobi, that we live evolves so quickly. But still, when it comes to like relationships, it's just boring to me how we're expected to find each other. I'm like, no, I don't want to go out clubbing and meet people. No, I don't. I do everything on my phone. So why can't I meet somebody on my phone? Okay. So the project was really about me trying to kind of like address my anxiety or my shame around online dating and seeing what's that about and do it until you're no longer ashamed about it, but also to see what other Africans are doing. And I want to channel that into my next work of fiction because I had maybe close to maybe 21 dates in like a span of that period of 2 months, under 2 months, and none of them were the same and all of them were exhilarating.
I can't wait. I feel like as a parent, this is going to be a research. Like I'm going to learn a lot. I'm also scared to learn what it's like out there on the internet, but sounds fantastic.
There's a lot of things out there on the internet. There's something for everybody.
That's what I've heard.
There's something for everyone.
That is what I heard.
Yeah.
Oh, Shiro, this has been such a delight to just sit with you and mull over these ideas and these choices that your characters have made, that you have made as a writer and as a thinker, and to just share that space with all of you here. I mean, we could go on, I think, a few more hours, but the sun is setting, so I think we will go on. But for the sake of the show, I just want to say thank you. Thank you what you've contributed to our collective imagination, both here today, but also as a Nairobi community, as a Pan-African community. I think all of us, as your sisters, would say well done. So
thank you. Thank you very much. Oh, I love this. Thank you for an incredible conversation. I really, truly enjoyed this. I'm not just saying that. This was probably one of my top 3 favorite interviews.
Okay, well, let's do it again. Cheers to that. Cheers. Cheers to that. So thank you for listening to Uproot. We will tag everything in the show notes so you can find Shiro and her incredible work, the work of Bunk Books and Book Bunk, and all of her writing. We'll make sure it's all in the show notes. And as we always say, keep at it until it becomes rooted. Talk to you soon. Thank you so much to Wanjiru Koinange for joining me today on Uproot to talk about her compelling and heartbreaking book, The Havoc of Choice. I'm particularly indebted also to my dear friend Lisa, who hosted us all today. Lisa, mwah, so grateful for your friendship and your partnership on doing this event today. I don't know about you, but that was a conversation to be had and to be listened to and re-listened to. I'm so grateful for the beautiful women who joined me today and lended their wisdom, their insight, their perspectives about the choices we make and the lives that we create as a result. Even though I've been gone for a while, you can still find me at the same places. Instagram and Twitter, it's at Uproot and Lil, L-I-L-L. Facebook, it's Uproot the Podcast. And if you want to go old school and email me, you can do that at uprootthepodcast@gmail.com. And of course, you can find Shiro at her website, wanjirukoinange.com. And in the show notes, you'll find links to where you can find her book, Havoc of Choice. You can buy it on Amazon. You can buy it here in Nairobi at lots of different places. We're so thrilled that you can hear her story, and you should get the book if you don't have it already. As Wangari Maathai taught us, we have to keep at it until it becomes rooted, and no matter what choices you're making today, keep at it. Talk to you soon.